Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to the session. I know there's a lot of good sessions to talk through. So just quick introductions, and we'll dive into the topic here. It's only 30 minutes long and a lot to cover, so hopefully we can get you guys some good lessons, get you some experiences. Afterwards, if you want to talk to us, we'll be outside. Happy to talk to you. I know we're standing between you and lunch, so definitely have lots of free time then. Just ways of introduction, my name's Ryan Johnson, Associate Director at Accenture. I am our software engineering practice lead for our Columbus Innovation Hub. So spend most of my time talking to both clients, and when I say clients, I mean internal and external to Accenture, about how do we do Agile better, how do we do XP better, and how do we really look to scale it for large enterprises.
Yeah, good afternoon. So myself, Chidanan, that's Chida for short. I am working as application development manager in Accenture for past, I've been working for past 10 years in Accenture. And since this year, I joined as a senior software engineer in Columbus Innovation Hub.
So I wanted to name my presentation Elephant, Horse, and Rabbit, and we'll get to it in a minute, but they wouldn't let me do that. So instead, you got the very exciting title of How to Scale Agile for the Enterprise. So most people are probably well aware, right? Software engineers are being asked to do more than ever, right? And more people are becoming software engineers, right? As we start to expand what it means to be a software engineer, more and more people are kind of falling under that scope. So your IT organization needs to move at the speed of your business. And I know everyone talks about let's push to production 100 times a day, 50 times a day. That's not always right, right? Your business may only need to push to production every 6 months, every 12 months, whatever it may be. So don't feel like you need to push to production every day, especially if you're in a large enterprise, right? There's use cases for that, and there's use cases when you don't need to do that. But how do you build a team that can support the speed your business wants to move at? So in reality, and this is where the rabbit, horse, and elephant comes from, at Accenture, we kind of group things into three big buckets, right? You have your fast lane traffic or your rabbits. Generally, that's how you interact with your clients. So mobile, front end, all those types of things. Usually there's very little tech debt greenfield. And usually that's where you find a lot of your upskilled developers that already know how to do a lot of the Agile and XP concepts. In the middle lane, generally you'll see your anti-corruption layers here or your middleware. So that's how do you start to decouple and let those rabbits go faster while also supporting your slow lane traffic. So often have CI/CD, but don't need to be deploying multiple times a day. And then down at the bottom, you have your elephants, your slow traffic, right? That's generally your maybe still doing Waterfall, right? But they can leverage some Agile principles. Usually your systems of record that move pretty slow, only deploy 3 or 4 times a year. And the stars are generally your most risky deployments, right? That's when you have all 3 lanes that deploy on the same day. Those are your big enterprise releases, usually where people stay up all night and make sure everything goes right. So you have these 3 lanes of traffic. We can apply Agile to all of them, regardless, even if you're a slow lane Waterfall. We'll talk about how do you do Agile there. So I put this in here. Hopefully most people know why we're trying to do Agile. I think you would be shocked at the number of clients I've talked to that are just adopting Agile because everyone else is adopting Agile and they don't actually know the benefits they plan to get out of Agile. So really we break it into two big categories, delivery improvements and cost reduction. So how do you get to the market faster? And those generally, again, line up with your rabbits. And how are you increasing business agility? So all about experimentation, again, meeting that market demand. On the bottom side, reducing cost. So generally, this is where your slow lane tends to play and where we see the greatest case for Agile for them. So it's about reducing the effort for them to deliver, right? Can they start to integrate CI/CD so they aren't spending so much time building? And reducing your overall running cost of operating those platforms. So a super busy slide, I'm not going to read through it, don't worry, you guys can get it later, I'm sure. But really, we take a kind of 2-pronged approach to it. So on the right-hand side, we have our culture that needs to be driven from the outside in. So you start at the very highest levels and drive that Agile culture down. At the same time, you can start on the inside of your execution, which was really your Agile processes, and start to drive that out, right? So common questions we see on the execution to be your software engineers. How do I do TDD? How do I do pair programming? those sorts of things, right? And then at the very highest level, how are we building leaders that drive an agile culture? Right? Do those leaders need to be changed? Do their incentive packages need to be changed, right? Because lots of times it's all about predictability, which Agile can give you that, right? But not necessarily looking at the innovation side of it. So kind of a two-pronged approach here of how do you drive the culture and also how do you change processes. So when we look at scaling this out further, right, we have what we call a circle of control, which is what your engineers control, right? What can I do today to make my software better? Versus the circle of concern. And the circle of concern is the thing we see kind of the greatest frustration with at a software engineering pace. If you have your software engineers dealing with a circle of control, they tend to quit. They don't like dealing with that, right? Because it's outside of their control, but they're being tasked to fix it. So we talk about easy things that you can do: pair programming, code reviews, product management. How do we automate things? How do we increase quality? Those tend to be within an Agile team's control. Things that are outside of their control: business engagement, right? Operations engagement. How can I deploy to production? They may not be able to control that, and asking them to deploy to production 10 times a day when they can't tends to get very frustrating. So how do we deal with that? So we generally have a three-step approach, right? So the first one is improve upon things you can control, right? There's no reason any engineering team in the world can't start doing unit testing tomorrow, right? Or can't start doing TDD, XP, those types of things. As you become masters of those and as you become better at that, right, start to expand the work you are taking on. So many people in this room may not believe it, right? But CI/CD often is thrown over the wall and a different team gets to take care of it. You may not have a product person on your team, right? That's not something you can control, but over time, can you start to bring that person onto your team? And then the last thing, and this is where we tend to see the very executive leadership need help, right? How do we start to change the way we handle demand? How do we change the way we fund projects? That's the hardest one, and generally that is the one that we take on last. So I'm just going to talk you through a couple real examples because I put him through a lot of this stuff, so hopefully he has some good examples for you guys.
Yes. So the circle of control, that's very important. And as a developer, it's really important for me. I mean, not because I like to control, but the thing is, circle of control gives a sense of engagement and motivation to the teams. And they can start delivering values rather than meeting deadlines. So the organizations can focus on how they can enable the teams to improve the things that they can do, as in through enablement, academies, and coaching. That's what it says. But if you look at the points, so the teams can be enabled to upskill themselves to learn new technologies, tools, and techniques. They can be coached to adapt or to follow the new testing strategies like automated testing, behavior testing, accessibility testing in some cases. The product managers can be coached to manage leaner product, to write smaller stories, get quicker feedbacks. And then teams can start focusing on automation, like automated testing, automated deployments, automated quality checks, and things like that. And I have seen this firsthand. For example, in my past engagement, the team did not have any control on any of these aspects. They were just trying to meet the deadlines. The PMs were not focused on smaller stories or leaner product. They were focused on how can I meet the deadline. And people were frustrated. Since I joined my new engagement or new team here in Innovation Hub, we started following these things religiously. We started doing test-driven development. We started doing smaller stories so we can get quicker feedback, and that led us to gain more confidence in the product, and that helped us to build trust with our client partners. Next.
So a good example, and Cheetah probably doesn't even remember this. So I was working with his team for a long time, and I kept yelling at them. Maybe not yelling, strongly encouraging them to do pair programming over and over. And they kept talking about how they had these delivery pressures. They weren't able to do pair programming. They needed to deliver, right? So one night, I stayed late, and unbeknownst to them, I stole half their monitors and half their keyboards and set up pairing stations, and they didn't really have an option after that, and they now love pair programming. They've seen kind of a reduce in cycle time from 4 days to 1 day.
Yep.
Did I make that up?
Yes. So
yes, I made it up. Fantastic.
we actually achieved that because now we don't do code reviews, and some people may get scared of it, but
right.
no, because we do pair programming. The code reviews happen real time. There is no time set aside for specific code reviews, and we share the ownership of the product, right? So I'm here for 3 days. My team can perform easily.
Yeah. So good example there of how can you take control, right? They didn't necessarily want to take control, but I forced them to. So good example there. So we'll talk a little bit about how do you expand your circle of control.
Yep. So as I said, we do pair programming, so that helped us to reduce manual code reviews. We also started doing continuous integration. That was part of the process, but we started doing continuous deployments. That helped us to have automated tests. So we started building automated tests, and then that gave us quicker feedback among the team. So our product managers felt comfortable to go out and have show and tells with the product owners, and that eventually helped us to build the trust. The important part that you see here is the quality, upscale engineers on automated testing. So what we tried with the pair programming is we tried pairing the traditional developers with traditional testers, and we started blurring those boundaries so that we can we started calling people software engineers rather than a developer and a tester. So now a developer can write automated test. A tester got a chance to pair with the developer and started learning the other software engineering tools and techniques. And that really helped us to eventually build the trust, because we feel comfortable among ourselves, and our product owners feel comfortable with us. And I mean, I can give some comparisons here, because there are other teams which don't follow these strategies in the organizations, and the feedback that they give to their product owners is they say they would take 3 days to perform certain tasks, and we say we can merely do in hours because we feel comfortable in our deliverables. And that started, that's how we started to expand our circle of control. When we started reaching out to others, our stakeholders, we started doing repetitive show and tells. Like every week we have show and tells, and the product that we show mostly gets certified and is ready to go into production. But since we are in a big time waterfall model, we don't put it into production. But the product owners feel comfortable that it can go.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add, the hardest part here is really around sort of building that trust, right? And it's interesting, the way we've seen the trust be built the quickest and the easiest is through sort of this testing and a lens of quality, right? As you begin to have higher quality, right, you're creating less defects in IST or SIT, whatever you want to call it, right? You're creating less defects in a UAT type region. Both your development manager, your engineering manager, and your business partners start to trust you more, right? So it no longer becomes, well, we can only deploy to UAT every other week because it was such a huge event, right? It would take a day outage. There were all these new defects created. Now you're starting to shrink that and say, look, we're confident we're going to be able to put it in. It's not going to cause issues, and they start to let you go faster and faster and gain more control, right? They start to let you push your automated pipeline all the way through. They start to believe in automated toll gates you set up along the continuous deployment pathline. So I think that big one is, it's a little weird to be on here because it's not anything you can do necessarily outright to build trust, but it's very important, and as you start to build that trust, you'll see the circle of control really expand. So this last one, and this one is, depending on where you sit in the life cycle, this one tends to be focused much more at kind of the executive level. So how do you reduce the circle of concern for your teams, right? And some of this is fairly obvious, some of it is hopefully not so much. So business engagement and operations engagement, very, very important here, right? How do you start to reduce the need for, me opening up an ITSM, right? Me spending an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours chasing someone down to get the approval to deploy to UAT. How do you start to make that not a concern anymore? Enterprise architectures and dependencies, how do you start to break that apart, right? And we talked about it, right? It's that level of anti-corruption. How do you start to break that so that way you can go faster, even if you are in the slow lane, right? Are there pieces on the monolith you can carve off? Project-funded teams. So this one is always a tough one, and probably the one we see our clients struggle with the most is how do I change my funding model away from a project specifically and fund a product and drive that business outcome? And I think that one is a lot of education with the business. For years, I hate that we've had the business side of the house and the IT side of the house, right? Those really need to become one, and really IT is supporting the business and delivering value for them. So I think if you look at it through a lens of that, of what value is IT driving, right? That's how you can start to fund products instead of projects. Requirements and change management. So that's a fun one, right? Because they always want fixed scope, fixed date, fixed timeline, fixed price, right? So how do you deal with those changes that are coming in? And really what I coach a lot of people there is we always talk about we will deliver something on a given date. I can guarantee you that, right? I can't tell you what that thing will be, but we will deliver on a date and it will be high quality, right? And I think that's really what the sort of trust is there with your business partners, and as you start to build that is I trust that you're going to give me the right thing to build, and I will build it with quality and deliver it on time. Common roadblocks. So we'll talk through these a little bit and strategy we've used to get through some of them. So organizational structure. So lots of times you may see organizations cut across by technology, right? You have your front-end developers, your middleware developers, your back-end developers, which it's kind of why you see those 3 lanes of traffic. Sometimes you'll see them broken up by technology, right? These are my DBAs, and they can only do DBA things, which doesn't make any sense. So how do you start to break that down? I think most people may have seen Conway's Law, but really it's about the more complex and constrained your organization is, you'll build software that sort of mimics that. So trust, and this is, it's the second time we brought it up. It's really important, and I think it's what enables a lot of the Agile practices and processes we talk about. Over the past years, and probably many reasons, right? The leaders of the organizations, whether they be on the business or IT side, don't trust IT to do the right thing anymore, right? They are very constrained, and that's why they put all these checks and balances in place. Slowly taking back that trust and earning that trust back from him, it is hard, but it's what allows us to go faster. Administrative burdens. This is one of my favorite. I must obtain 72 approvals to get code into production, and that is a real stat. There was one person who had to get 72 approvals to push something to production, which I think everyone would agree is probably a few too many. The other interesting one we see here, and this goes back to projects being funded, is I don't have a charge coder, I don't have a bucket to put my time to automate this step. So now I'm going to manually do the same step on 8 projects in a row, rather than putting that upfront investment in the automation to get the benefit later. So thinking about how do we, and that goes back to, right, if you're funding a product, they're going to invest in the product, they're going to make it automated. Gito will talk to the other 3 for me.
Sure. Yep, the tools. So generally in large organizations, there are these groups called Chief Development Office, and their role is, they have their own purpose, but typically they prescribe certain technologies, tools, tools for CI/CD and etc. So it's good to know if you have such organization or such mini organization within the enterprise, and what are they prescribing to. If they don't prescribe anything or if they don't exist, then it's fine. But then the teams can come up with the tools that they're comfortable with and reach out.
Yeah, probably a good example here, and I won't name it who, but one of the clients we were working with was using, hopefully there's no IntelliJ people in the room, I saw them downstairs last night. They were using the community edition because their company would not pay for the IntelliJ license, which is such a, in the grand scheme of things, having a fully functional working in IntelliJ is probably well worth the investment, but they didn't want to go through the 72 approvals to get a single license of IntelliJ. So things like that, simple tools, it seems like it's not a big deal, but right, the quality of life that the developer gets by having the right tools is huge for us.
Yep, and one of the point that says is I don't have the ability to deploy my code, and I experienced it. As a developer, I couldn't put my code into development environment. I had to take certain approvals, and I had to wait for overnight deployments because the teams were offshore. So I had to wait for my code to see how it works in an integrated environment for one full day, and that was painful for me. And so the organizations can take a look at these points and see how they can enable the teams to function better. The culture is also a good point because in the big enterprises, the teams typically operate in a manner where they are designed for a specific function, and these people will do the development. They will not be handling any kind of operations, or they will not be testing the software they're building. So that's what the teams are structured in typical waterfall model. But the organizations can take a look at how they can break those barriers, and ingrain the mentality within the teams that they can do the testing, they can deploy the application up to certain environments. And then the role-based guidance says, I'm a developer, I'm not a tester. As I said earlier, we started to blur those boundaries within our teams. How an organization can enable all the teams to blur those boundaries within their teams, to enable a developer to perform testing, and upskill the testers so that they can take up the development work. And once the code deploys to operations, once the code is deployed to production or in UAT, the operations will deal with it. So like L2 or L1 people will deal with it. That's not the way going forward, because the teams need to take ownership of their deliverable of their product. And how can organizations help enable those teams to take those ownerships? That will be important. And to follow my manager-leader approach, that's like in the traditional way, the team member will not step up, will not take an ownership, thinking that, okay, my manager will tell me what to do. I don't think it is appropriate to speak up. I think organizations need to enable those people to speak up.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add around kind of role-based guidance and culture, right? A lot of enterprises have the concept of separation of duties or separation of concerns, right? Where they don't want whoever wrote the code deploying it to production. And to a large degree, I understand where that comes from, but it doesn't make sense anymore, right? In the world we live in, it just doesn't make sense. And so some of that goes to having the right tools and automated checks in place, right? If I can go through and prove that I've done an open source scan and I don't have vulnerabilities, right? I've done a penetration scan, I've done a performance test, and I've done that all automated, that's much better than me trying to hand the code off to someone else, letting them do their open source scan, handing it off to someone else, and having this process over and over that can be very, very mistake prone. So if you do have separation of concerns, separation of duties, right, really it's how can you automate those concerns and have the sort of hard proof that says, look, we went through all these steps, we're confident our code is going to be right. So a couple ways that we generally address these two things. We got perfect. So we'll start on the right because it's probably more relevant and more important for people in here. So how does Accenture go about helping our clients with mastering the circle of control? So we do labs type work, right, where they may be coming to our facility, we'll go to their facility, whatever it may be. We'll have our XP experts on the ground pairing with them, TDD, showing them all kinds of the ropes as we deliver that software. So really that helps them manage it. It also gives them a good ability to sort of push back against when they get the pressures to not do the things that we believe are right. So we talk about dojos, right? One to many, we may bring in one person and have that person sit on a team, but very similar where we're trying to scale there. So coaching, you bring in a few people a lot like this, right? They're kind of up here giving their presentation or talking through it, helping, again, push back, and that's all about sort of letting the team own their circle of control. And then lastly, we do a lot of academies, but they're training, right, where we have kind of 20 people. The big one here is all of our academies, they are not PowerPoint slides where someone stands up there and tells you what DevOps is. It's, we're going to go have you install Jenkins on a cloud. You're going to stand it up. You're going to write software. You're going to put it through the pipeline. So people get very used to that. Especially in a large enterprise, right? There's a not insignificant number of people who have probably never created a project before from the ground up and have never been in a project that doesn't have a lot of tech debt, right? So it's getting them used to that. There is a better way. There is a different way to do these sorts of things. So how do we help address sort of the circle of concerns from an organizational side? Modern engineering practices. So as bad as or as much help as the software engineers need, right? A lot of the product managers, project managers, program managers, whatever you want to call them, don't understand how the funding model needs to evolve. Don't understand how the organization needs to revolve around a product and not be aligned around technologies. Agile demand management, so all that sort of thing of how do you rotate the business to Agile, and I would say that's kind of the number one area we see outside of the IT side is the business is really struggling to understand how do I be Agile, right? I've always just given the requirements to the IT organization and they give me software at the end, right? That's not really the way it's going to work anymore. And then we talk about organizational change management. So how do you take these things on the right that we're doing at a small level for 1 or 2 teams, and how do you scale that out to 10 or 20,000 developers, right? That's a very hard thing to do. How do you get everyone singing from the sort of the same songbook over and over and saying the same thing? So a lot of good there. The other thing we talk about on that side is what does your sort of training and human management process look like? You know, are you creating new job families? That's an interesting thing that we've been dealing with a lot lately, right? When Scrum Masters first showed up on the scene, they didn't have a job category for them, so they all got thrown in as project managers. So how do you start to also evolve there in kind of all the aspects of your business? So that was all we had. We have 2 minutes. If anyone has a question, I will answer it, or I'll try to. Otherwise, I'll hang out outside here afterwards for a while. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for attending. Again, if you need me, I'll be outside.